And greetings. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on BlazeTV, radio, and podcast. Steve Deace here with Todd Erzin, Aaron McIntyre, all of you coming up on today's show. Dr. Scott Atlas will be joining us. We haven't talked to Scott in many a moon. He'll be joining us here at the bottom of the hour. I'm just going to ask him your thoughts on the pending retirement of Anthony Fauci, and then I'll just make sure that we get out of here on time. For the top of the hour commercial break. That's literally the only question I've got teed up, and then we'll just see what happens from there. Next hour, we get into Theology Thursday as we continue our look at my most recent book, Do What You Believe, or You Won't Be Free to Believe It Much Longer, and we'll get into 3 non-political questions as well. Right off the top, I want to mention something that we were discussing at the top of the show yesterday. Are we watching a grand pivot take place? And again, this is a pivot that last year I thought for sure they would make. This year, I changed my mind because I'm still not ready yet, and may never be, who knows, to fully embrace Todd's medical ideology and people like him. But I am certainly convinced of the cult of the magical power of vaccines after the last year. I am certainly convinced of that. And would millions of people just say, yes, I am a living cadaver for Pfizer, and then just turn around and say, wow, these things were terrible and I probably should have never taken them? That just seemed, a level of self-assessment that a cult is incapable of. But what if you offered that cult, because it's all the same people, an even bigger idol, an even more meaningful groupthink experience?
God, this is also dumb.
It's also where we are.
I know.
It is, dude, 1/4 of Gen Zers just told an American pollster their career goal is social media influencer.
Yep.
1/4, Todd. 1/4. That they think their job in the future is going to be social media influencer. They're just going to work and live on TikTok all day long. 1/4, Todd.
Steve, name the 3 Kardashian sisters.
Exactly. So don't come at me with this is
I'm
so
not coming
dumb.
at you.
It is dumb.
I'm with you.
It is the most stupid time ever to be alive in all of human history right now.
Yes.
All right? Because of all the information and education and everything else at our fingertips, and we've just collectively never been dumber in spite of all that. And maybe even because of it, frankly, if we're being really honest. But we had this discussion yesterday. I know a lot of you in the audience have been anticipating this all along. Our CEO here, Tyler Cardin's been predicting this all along. I wavered on my prediction. And maybe I overreacted to, really for the first time in my life, coming into full contact with, as Todd calls it, the magical power of vaccines. And I'm like, whoa. And I've covered, because all I kind of do nowadays is cover cults, but I've never seen a cult quite like this. I mean, this is even beyond the abortion cult and some of the other cults I've seen. Well, if you needed further confirmation that the great pivot has officially commenced, I present for you 2 pieces of evidence. The one that I'll mention in a minute is one many of you have already seen, but I don't know how many of you have seen the first one I'm going to mention here. The Daily Beast, which of course is regime-approved media, which is why they never get cited or mentioned on this show, has a story out citing a study that Paxlovid doesn't work for the vast majority of people who need it the most. Shows absolutely no benefits whatsoever. Now, we could have told you this like a year ago. But this is regime-approved media. And that brings us to the second piece of evidence. YouTube is now lifting its guideline against claiming that the jabs don't stop the spread of the virus. Now, today is August 25th. On August 6th of last year, more than a year ago, it was August 6th of last year, Rochelle Walensky, figurehead of CDC, went on with Wolf Blitzed, still one of Russia's greatest nicknames ever, went on with Wolf Blitzed and said out loud in a clip that I think we have probably played on this show approximately 666 times, if you know what I'm saying, G. Okay.
That's fact-checked. It's true.
Yes. She admitted on August the 6th on national television, granted it's CNN, so I won't blame you for not seeing it and for the most of the country missing it. But on August 6th, she admitted last year on national television that the vaccines, this was during the height of the Delta wave, the vaccines no longer stop the spread of the virus. She said this, the head of CDC said this on August 6th of last year. And now today, on August 25th of this year, as you've watched Jill Biden now get COVID for a second time. Joe Biden got COVID for a second time, tested positive 8 days in a row, despite being allegedly quadruple jabbed. And now, after the story, did you guys even know? I didn't even know that there was a committee of House Democrats looking at
No, I didn't know.
the Operation Warp Speed. I wasn't even aware of this. Granted, in fairness to us, there are so many comprehensive investigations of anybody that's even Trump adjacent these days. It is hard to keep up with them all. Fair?
Indeed.
Indeed. So most of us had no idea this was even going on until they released a paper yesterday saying that they rushed Operation Warp Speed to try to get the vaccines out quicker in order to win the 2020 election. And that is what prompted this whole conversation yesterday, is the pivot on. And I was at least open to it, but still a little, I don't know, maybe. Today, with the YouTube news, and I got to tell you, man, I hate those Fargan passages on a molecular level, like on a molecular level. The YouTube news on the heels of this report yesterday. What was the point of YouTube lifting this yesterday or this morning? Why? Just, somebody had the wrong avocado toast over there, and an algorithm engineer decided, it's been over a year since Rochelle Walensky's fessed up. I guess we can go ahead and let the truth be told on her platform. Why now? Why the day after? We've already got FOIA requests and actual physical evidence of collusion between these entities and Democrats in office, right? We already have it. Alex Berenson's let forth his own files of the White House trying to get him banned from these platforms, right? We already have physical evidence that this collusion exists. So I suppose you have two options here. You can believe that for whatever reason, YouTube just found out that on August 6th of last year, the head of CDC admitted on national television that the vaccines no longer stop the spread of the virus. And we're like, oh, snap. We didn't know. Okay, you guys can talk about that then. The experts have agreed. Or you could note that they make this decision, Todd, the day after this House report comes on. Forgive me, but after Brett Kavanaugh, Roy Moore, COVID, the jabs, the border, everything else, I'm probably going to side here with the latter. The pivot is on. That is my official position. The pivot is on. To what extent it will go, how many will sign on board, but whatever needs to be done to give some base culpability for the data that is coming out right now that is devastating about the effects of these jabs. They are setting the stage to at least place some of the blame at the feet of the man who wants sole credit for all of it, Donald Trump, and they're about to give it to him.
Well, I'm like you. As much as I believe in the cult of vaccines, I also have competing cults going on in my head, and I believe that when the lie is the point, ultimately, you will try anything in the name of politics. And this has the impossible feeling of that 48-hour period where a guy named Joe Biden, who won nothing in the first three presidential primaries, Steve, back in 2015, suddenly within a 48-hour period was necromanced to be the guy. It has the feeling that this is a political machination right now akin to that.
The other part of this as well that I've had trouble wrapping my minds around, how would they pivot, is the profit of Pfizer and their partners and all of that. Well, you can see what they're doing now. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're trying to say those jabs bad, these next ones really
Correct.
good.
Yes.
That's how they're doing this pivot. They're trying. They're trying to
that's
keep.
a great point.
They're trying to keep the jab cult going while at the same time trashing the old ones. It's incredible.
Yes, that's a great point, because how are they going to continue their biomedical fascist regime? Well, these ones are more proven. These ones are more tested. We put these things through rigorous testing. They weren't rushed like the ones that Orange Man Bad demanded we do, that he even claimed. He's out there at how many of his rallies has he said in the last 2 years? They said it couldn't be done. They said it couldn't be done. I got it done in 9 months. And we're 5 minutes away from commercials saying, who thinks you can make successful vaccines in 9 months? There's a reason we were so far behind on variants. We didn't rush these vaccines. So we had no other vaccines to give you other than the old ones. See, now, dude, now I'm riffing off of what you just said. It makes that's the missing link of the story right there. You just provided you just provided the elbow, the shoulder. That's the joint right there, brother. That's the pivot. Well, I mean, that's why we're so far behind on variants. That's why we're just now coming out with an Omicron variant. You can't do this in 9 months like Trump claimed. Yeah. But we had to rush them because he made us rush them. He was desperate to win the election. And didn't we tell you from the beginning? Didn't President Kamala, because this time next year she will be, didn't President Kamala tell you she wouldn't trust a vaccine from Donald Trump? Yeah, brother. Fire that up. It's got a good beat and you can dance to it. You can see that puppy coming.
Napoleon from Animal Farm right now is just like, pour one out, man.
Yep.
That's a great reference. Absolutely it is. All right, we have something special here. Well, you won't find it special after you watch it, but it is special compared to what we typically do with Aaron's montage, and I'll tell you about it, and you'll see it here. After we tell you about our friends over at Taiga Coolers, we're heading into peak cooler season. We're still in August, at least for in the next few days, the biggest vacation month of the year, state fair month at a lot of places around the country. But we're also now heading into football season, tailgate season. It is peak cooler season. If you want a peak cooler from our friends at Taiga Coolers, American-made, American employees, pro-American company. They share your values. They'll customize it for you as well. If you've got, your own corporate logo you want on there, you want to put your kid on there, your family crest, whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't violate any copyright law, they can do that for you, or they can just sell you a pretty kick-ass cooler. If you just don't care what's on it, you just want one that's really good, they'll do that too. And they'll sell it to you for 10% off when you go to taigacoolers.com and enter the promo code Steve to get that discount. 10% off taigacoolers.com, TAIGA for taigacoolers.com, promo code Steve to get $10 off at taigacoolers.com. So today we have decided we are not going to do a montage of what happened while we were away. And instead, we are going to open the show by featuring this report that I want to warn you, I don't do this very often. I'm going to make an exception here, which should give you an idea of the subject matter we are about to cover. If you are listening or watching right now with little ones, and you can't get them into another room, or you can't put on headphones, we would strongly urge you to come back and watch and listen to this portion of the program at a later time, when young, impressionable eyes and ears that don't need to be tarnished and corrupted, even though they're trying to get to them, are not within eyesight or earshot of this report. So 3, 2, 1. And with that said, here's a report, and a very disturbing one, from my oldest daughter, Anastasia.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached a new level of evil if you even thought that was possible. A minor attracted person is defined as an individual with sexual attraction to individuals who are minors or below the legal age of consent.
Folks, my name is Miranda. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and sex therapist in Erie, Pennsylvania. And today I want to talk about minor attracted persons. And I want to talk about minor attracted persons because they are probably the most vilified population of folks in our culture. And most folks are making incorrect assumptions about them without actually knowing much about them. And those assumptions create harm for an already marginalized population. You may have noticed that I'm using the term minor attracted persons, sometimes abbreviated to MAPS, instead of the more commonly used term pedophile. And I'm doing this because the term pedophile has moved from being a diagnostic label to being a judgmental, hurtful insult that we hurl at people in order to harm them or slander them.
Now, we can't blame Miranda too much for this point of view because leading this march is a woman by the name of Alan Walker. Dr. Alan Walker. Now, don't let the buzz cut and the peach fuzz you grow throughout puberty fool you. This is, in fact, a woman. Now, Dr. Alan Walker used to work for the Old Dominion University before she decided it was, quote, her time to go, unquote. However, she was put on a professor watch list, and I think it was very clear that she was fired, but maybe that's just me speculating. Anyways, now Dr. Alan Walker, get this, works for the Johns Hopkins University and their child sexual abuse wing. So not only is this evil woman leading the march for pedophiles to be included and praised in society, she is also helping children overcome sexual abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, when we live in a world where there's no definitions for anything, not even simple terms anymore, this is what happens, and this is what we've been saying for years. Now, Dr. Alan Walker came out with a book called A Long Dark Shadow, Minor Attracted People and Their Pursuit of Dignity. God, what an amazing time. Their pursuit of dignity, because they're not popular because they're pedophiles. Now, the introduction to this book is to those who accept themselves, to those who are working on it, and to those who accept others, even when it's hard. I mean, yes, it is very hard to accept pedophiles because they prey on children. So here's a study that she did. Says, quote, I conducted semi-structured interviews with 42 MAPs across the globe. Most of these interviews took place over the phone or over text-based chat, although some were through video chat or in person. As I was interested in speaking only to non-offending minor attracted people, requirements for participation in my study were that my participants had to be 18 years or older, preferentially or exclusively attracted to individuals under the age of 18, and that they had never committed a crime involving sexual contact with a minor. The MAPs I interviewed and whose narratives are presented throughout this book range in age from 19 years old to their mid 60s, with the majority in their 20s and 30s. Guys, are you listening to this? 19 years old to 60-year-old men. That's so gross. And she says the majority were men. Here are some other quotes from Dr. Alan Walker that got her put on the professor watch list. Quote, having an attraction to minors, as long as it isn't acted on, doesn't mean that the person who has those attractions is doing something wrong. Unquote. Quote, a lot of people, when they hear the term pedophile, they automatically assume that it means a sex offender, and that isn't true, and it leads to a lot of misconceptions about attraction towards minors. Now, it's not only Dr. Alan Walker anymore. We are now getting into the territory of other people catching on, pedophiles. So here's a quote from a Reddit board that I found. Let's get a few things straight. Minor attracted people are people who are sexually attracted to those under the age of 18. I am one of them. As a pedophile who's attracted to prepubescent kids, however, we're all very different people. Many of us, myself included, don't ever have relationships with kids. We know it's wrong. We believe in being good people, and so although we might have sexual desires, we find other outlets for them that don't involve children, or else we suppress our desires entirely. I don't know about you guys, but when I read, although we might have sexual desires, we find other outlets for them, I immediately think of child pornography. Again, let me reiterate this. When we don't have definitions for simple terms such as woman, such as man, such as marriage, everything changes. We are now in an evil state. Now, from everything I can find, this is a fairly new movement from 2021 to 2022. We have time. We have the time to shut this down. Shut evil people down. This is pedophilia, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what you're seeing on your screen is the MAP, minor attracted person flag. Yes, you heard that right. The minor attracted persons flag. Remember when the rainbow flag came out, and then the trans flag came out, and then the lesbian flag came out, and we never thought it could get worse? Well, folks, it's gotten worse. This isn't made up. This is real life. Face it, fight it.
A report for the show from my oldest daughter, Anastasia.
Great work, Anna. Great work.
Let's get some reaction to what you just saw. Todd, I'll let you begin.
Well, this is usually the point where you say, I don't think I'm going to go to Todd because I don't think I can trust what he has to say. There's devils.
Hell is empty.
Yeah.
For all the devils are here. Yeah.
You know, I've been made public enemy number one in a public school district because I've been pointing things like this out. And I hate it, but I'm always right about this slippery slope. It's undefeated. And either you come to terms with this. We've had the attorney representing the folks in our Linn-Mar school district here in Iowa. That woman said this is the most egregious case of this kind of thing she's seen, and it's in Iowa, which, relatively speaking, is a red state. This is a war. It's a civil war that goes beyond territory. It goes beyond form of government. Again, this is about the definition of reality itself. It's either going to be giving the good, the true, and the beautiful a chance, or it is going to say we prefer hell. If you allow this to exist, it doesn't matter what you're doing on your weekends with your free time, which idol you're polishing, how much first world comforts you have, you are choosing hell.
So, Aaron, before I go to you, I want to add a little context to why the fact that this is being mainstreamed within Johns Hopkins University matters. First of all, Ben Carson spent a good deal of the preeminent portion of his medical career as a surgeon for Johns Hopkins University. And we just went through a situation in COVID where we all discovered that our local doctor isn't our local doctor anymore. They are fed protocols and studies and quote unquote research and guidelines from on high, from a few elite sectors, from CDC, FDA, and then they just apply your situation to what's in the protocol, what's in the notebook, and very few doctors will veer from it and treat you as an individual. We all just went through this under COVID for the last 28 months, right? Going on 29. So keep that in mind when I tell you. World University Rankings. Johns Hopkins rated number 10 rated university in the world. Top 100 universities in the United States by topuniversities.com, it's rated number 11. The 100 best nursing schools in the United States, the Nursing School Almanac ranks Johns Hopkins number 2 in the entire country. Best medical schools in the country, according to U.S. News and World Report, Johns Hopkins is rated number 3. Top 25 internal medicine residencies. Number 1, according to the Beckett Hospital Review, Johns Hopkins University. If this is getting mainstreamed, Aaron, at Johns Hopkins University, absolutely, that is getting fed into the bloodstream of the entire medical establishment eventually, if not currently.
Every day, Matt Walsh and or Libs of TikTok posts yet another video of another hospital somewhere in this country where people, mainly women, doctors, ethicists, talking just glibly about gender-affirming care. Even joyfully, as we saw with Boston Children's Hospital. Like it's a happy thing. You know, most of the time, at least, there's some degree of, this is a serious matter. How does it happen? Demonic possession? Yeah, that can be. But when you just slowly but surely IV drip this into the consciousness of an entire industry, the medical industry. That's how you get those people to talk so glibly about this. And the same thing is going to happen with so-called maps. Same thing is going to happen. Slippery slope, the only argument in the history of arguments that is undefeated. Correct? Correct. When people were laughed at for saying this is going to end up with pedophilia, dismissed for saying that, how do you like me now? This is why our government, our Constitution, was only designed for a moral and religious people. Really. Because what happens when the people are not moral and religious, well, I'm sure you've seen that video, kind of putting a bow on this conversation to some degree, coming full circle. You talked about earlier, Steve, the quarter of young people who want to be influencers all day. Moral and religious people. You've seen that video, I think maybe, of the religious philosopher in India named Osho, talking about the definition of democracy, and he's old and he's got this long beard, and he looks like he's about to fall asleep. And he says the definition of democracy is government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about here. And you go quickly from that to, well, it's not just stupidity, idiocy. There's a lot of that. Which is why we're simultaneously, there's no mistaking, we are simultaneously living in the most stupid times and the most evil times. Because those things can be interchangeable. When you're a sheep, you'll fall for anything. You'll do anything, including evil. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the edge of the slope, the end of the slope. Because a long time ago, we ceased being a moral and religious people. So yeah, there are hordes of doctors out there who will gladly hack off the breasts of your 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old
It's in the protocol guidelines, Aaron. I'm just following the guidelines from Johns Hopkins.
Within 5 years, even less than that at this pace. You will not, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, at the rate this is declining, you will not be able to call a minor attracted person a pedophile. You'll not be able to do that. And if it's consensual, hey, we're letting 10-year-old kids, we're letting them decide what their gender is.
Why can't they consent to sex?
Why can't they?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can see where this is going.
Absolutely.
You can see the dominoes were very, very, well, they were put there on purpose. There's a reason why they did the whole gender dysphoria thing and transgenderism thing before the pedophilia thing. It's very, very intentional.
Because now that they have, in the minds of almost, I would say, at least a quarter, maybe up to a third of the American people, just eradicated a bedrock of the age of consent in something involving your sexuality, your gender, your identity. It's an obvious next step now to take. If they had done it the other way around, people would have revolted. People have said, this is revolting, we're not doing this. And they would have never made it to their second point of gender. That's why they started with the gender, just as Aaron said. That's another salient observation that Aaron has made. That's two already in the first half hour of the program. So apparently we don't have to spend hours putting that montage together. Your analytical skills really improve here live on the air, brother. Slept in this morning because I didn't have to do the montage. But those dots, you have to, and the dude wearing the rainbow glasses in Anna's video isn't diabolical enough to connect the kinds of dots that we're talking about. The principalities from the unseen realm that are driving this agenda, though, they are. Well, we've got quote-unquote student loan forgiveness. We've got the Inflation Reduction Act that almost nobody actually thinks will reduce inflation. We've already got the worst inflation we've had in 40 years. Find out why precious commodities like gold and silver have long been used as a hedge by smart, prosperous people who want to protect their wealth and prosperity against government schemes and government debasements. Find out when you go to our friends over at Bullion Max. They want to get you started today with their silver starter kit. They will offer it to you at employee pricing. That includes the very popular silver American Eagle. They cannot offer it any more inexpensive than that. You get at the same cost that their employees get just to get you started in the precious metals space. The offer is so good, it is limited to just one per household, so you can get yours now when you go to bullionmax.com/Steve. That's bullionmax.com/Steve and get that silver starter kit at bullionmax.com/Steve. Well, we spent the opening few months of the year on this program studying his book weekly on the program. He's been on the show several times over the last couple of years. We welcome him back again, Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford University, former member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And Scott, it is a pleasure to have you back here on the show, brother. How are you?
Doing well. How about you?
I could be a little bit better, but I could be a lot worse. So there you go. So I was teasing the audience at the top of the show that we were going to have you on, and that I really only had one question lined up, and then I was just going to ask it and then just make sure that we got out of here for the top of the hour break on time. Okay. So here, so I'll just start with this one question, then we'll just see how long it takes you to get answer, and then I'll see if I can come up with any more. All right. Anthony Fauci's retirement. Your thoughts?
Well, Dr. Fauci leaves a legacy, and unfortunately for us, and really not just the country, but the world, the legacy will be long lasting. Here's what I mean by that. Dr. Fauci presided over the biggest debacle in public health history over 2 presidential administrations, by the way. First with his assistance of his underlings, Deborah Birx and Robert Redfield under the Trump presidency, and then as chief medical advisor to President Biden, he presided over the pandemic. And in this, the mandates, the lockdowns that he wanted, the school closures that he advocated for directly on Senate testimony and in the media, he got what he wanted. They got what they wanted, and that policy was a gross and horrific failure because it failed to stop the spread of the virus. It failed to protect those who we knew were going to die, the elderly. And there is a long-lasting, really what I call a sinful legacy of harms on an entire younger generation of healthy children who have now been damaged, and there's tons of data, which I will go into in detail on how they've been damaged. The second part of his legacy is the horrible and now dangerous distrust of public health leadership and health agencies in our country, because his behavior and that of his colleague, Francis Collins, head of NIH, but his behavior, Dr. Fauci's erratic pronouncements, not being forthright on data, not projecting and telling the data to the American public, instead inculcating fear intentionally. He said he wanted more fear in the task force meetings, using fear to sway the public, using the media to destroy and undermine all opinions that differed from his, from other public health and medical science experts. That was revealed in the FOIA emails. This kind of distrust, mandating or advocating for vaccines in young, healthy children, an experimental drug where they don't have a benefit from it, thereby advocating using our children. What kind of society would do this? Use our children as shields, okay? That breaks the social contract we have as a moral civilization with our children. I'm a father. I'm there to protect my children. They're not to be used to protect me, as if the vaccines would stop the spread anyway, which they don't. So this distrust of public health leadership, critical institutions that we need to rely on as a public, because there will be more crises. This is a huge part of his legacy. He personally was part of destroying that trust. And then he woke us up to two things. Number one, we can never allow bureaucrats like him, a person who's been in his position for almost 40 years, to have the power to dictate policy. That's not the role of a bureaucrat. That's not the role of an unelected person, unelected leader. That's not the role of an agency. An agency is supposed to give recommendations to the people in charge, not be in charge. We can never let that happen again. And then lastly, his legacy is that we need to restore medical and public health ethics into public health leadership. The ethics were broken in this pandemic. And what do I mean by that? Well, number one, public health is supposed to care about all health, total health, not just stopping some individual virus and destroying everybody in its wake. And that's exactly what was done. And secondly, if nothing else, public health policies are supposed to, first and foremost, protect the most vulnerable in society, and that's the elderly, children, the disabled, and that was just overtly broken, among other things, like, for instance, not being forthcoming with the public on the data, et cetera. So the one positive I would say is that Dr. Fauci's legacy woke us up to what can happen when we have incompetent, immoral, and unethical leadership in public health. We need to change these things. The institutions now are broken. Science is politicized, and I and others are doing things to fix that.
You mentioned going into a deep dive on some of the data that quantifies the disaster, as you described it, the sinful disaster of his legacy and policies. Can you share some of that data with us?
Well, sure. And I think we have to realize there's two parts to what happened with the lockdowns. Number one, they failed to do what they were said to do. If you look at the slope of the line on two administrations under Dr. Fauci's leadership, it was a constant slope of deaths per day for 2 years. Okay, so it failed to do what it said. But second point is the lockdowns themselves, the restrictions themselves, killed people and destroyed people. What do I mean by that? And particularly the children. Okay, we know the data. Okay, there was an explosion of psychiatric disease visits to doctors for teenagers. There was a dramatic increase in teenage girl suicides. This is during the lockdown. This is from the isolation, not the virus. This is the isolation. The policy caused this. There's an explosion of obesity in people in America ages 18 to 22. 52% of that age group, by the way, during 2020 gained unwanted weight, and that weight gain averaged 28 pounds. Okay, that's obesity. There was an explosion of drug abuse, substance abuse disorders. 25% of college-age students in June of 2020, just after the spring 2020 isolation policy, 25% of college-age Americans thought of killing himself. Hundreds of thousands just from spring school closures of 2020 alone. More than 300,000 cases of child abuse in America went unreported because schools are the #1 agency for reporting child abuse. This is such a disaster. We have created with these fear-inducing, irrational mask mandates of children, proven to have no scientific validity, but they went ahead and did that. We now have a whole generation of young kids who are walking around thinking they are a danger to everyone and everyone's a danger to them. Mm-hmm. Okay, we don't have any idea what the consequence of that will be. And not just that, the school closures themselves directly cause a massive learning loss, particularly in low-income families and poor kids. Not to mention all the loss of socialization, the loss of nutritional value. People that are in lower socioeconomic groups, it might be the kid's best meal of the day, the school meal. That was not available. Okay, we have a massive rise in domestic abuse, spousal abuse at home. And again, all these things are much worse for lower income people, single parent families. Lots of parents can't go and work from Zoom. So what the real sin of this, what another really immoral and perhaps unethical abuse of the public trust from public health leadership, was that this was a shift of burden to the low income groups, to poorer families, to single parent homes who were deemed essential workers, or even when they weren't, they were shut out of their jobs. Meantime, the affluent people, the people where I live in Palo Alto, the university professors, the news media, the politicians, what Martin Kulldorff, my friend, a Harvard epidemiologist, called the laptop class.
Mm-hmm.
The affluent people had no significant problems with this. If you look at the unemployment, they didn't suffer from this. They got their own kids educated because they have in their little neighborhood a micro environment of PhDs and MD people that come in and just teach their kids. They ordered in from Amazon, from the restaurants. This was a really incredibly sinful class warfare that was instituted by affluent, powerful people who, again, led by the Dr. Fauci's of the world, destroyed most working class and lower income families, yet the affluent people, they weren't that affected by it. I don't know. I'm not a history expert, but I can't imagine a time in American history where such a class warfare existed since slavery.
Scott, what are you doing now? And how can our audience continue to follow your work? They're well aware of the book, A Plague Upon Our House. Like I mentioned at the top, we went through that book for several months in painstaking detail. What are you doing now?
And I think, I wish I could give everybody that book for free. I think this is the historical record. This is what happened, but it's more than that. It illustrates the truth. Okay, there are very few people who are willing to speak the truth. And when you speak the truth, there's a price to pay, and that's okay. It's too important. Okay, we have a responsibility in the country that we live in a free country, to step up, rise up to speak the truth, because people depend on it. And the repercussions from that are trivial compared to the importance of doing it. Now, what am I doing? I'm working full-time as a senior fellow in health policy at Hoover Institution. I've also begun two additional efforts. Number one is the Academy for Science and Freedom under the wings of Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C., where we are just releasing today, in fact, and I think everyone should be aware of this, a restatement of ethical principles of public health. But we're also trying to fix the destruction of science, the politicization of science, the centralized power of science research funding, which is really a cartel that controls the entire narrative. We need to fix that. We're doing that under that academy. And then lastly, I've co-founded an international policy institute, which is called the Global Liberty Institute in the United States and in Switzerland, which addresses on a global basis, but really everywhere in the world where there's a free country, personal, economic, and social freedom, because these things are at risk right now. We need to reverse the loss of civil liberties. We need to reverse the non-objective media. We need to reverse this herd thinking and suppression of speech on university campuses. We need to ensure economic freedom, and in that I mean opportunity for everyone. And we need to counter this very harmful input of international organizations like the World Economic Forum and others who are intent on reducing individual freedom and national sovereignty so that there can be some sort of a global agenda. This needs to be reversed. everyone needs to be aware of it, and we are working hard to do that.
Great to hear. Well, we've always been big fans from the beginning. Don't be a stranger. God bless you, man. Appreciate what you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Appreciate it.
Guys, I don't. He used a word there, and he used it on multiple occasions. Sinful. That is really, of everything that he said, I was particularly struck by that. Thoughts?
Yeah. Again, it's as he tried to lay out in his book. It was never some fog of war. He went into this thing. You saw his metamorphosis over the first time he's been on our show, and I think he's been on our show like 6 times now. From the beginning till now. He says in the book multiple times, I kept waiting for everybody was going to wake up. I mean, the confusion would settle in and we would be scientists and we would do what we do, and that never happened. So as a man of reason and science, he applied Occam's razor. And the only logical conclusion of all this is sin at a cosmic level of depth. He's dead on. And I choose those words purposely. He is dead on.
Because this has all been about death. I mean, and destruction. Can you think of a malevolent being that like seeks to destroy? I'm coming up. It's got working out this nefarious
That seems pretty conspiratorial, cynical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like that, like played out if that was actually a real thing in front of our eyes. And it has been. Just echoing Todd quickly before we get out of here. Echoing Todd, it has been fascinating to see his evolution. And not only his evolution, but the fact he's doing something about it as well. That's exciting.
That's the key. He's doing something about it as well. Yes. I will come back. Speaking of doing something about it, name of the book, Do What You Believe, or you won't be free to believe it much longer. We will get into Theology Thursday next. All right, back here with Hour 2, live and on demand here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. Steve Deace here with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. Let us know what you think about what we think by emailing the show, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Steve Deace Show on Twitter and Getter. You can like us on Facebook, MeWe, Parler, and Gab. You can also find us on Truth Social at Real Steve Deace and get clips of the show free of any censorship and also free of charge to watch when you go to rumble.com/Steve Deace Show. Those of you that listen to the podcast version, thank you. Please, if you don't mind, leave us a 5-star review and hit us up as well with a subscribe or follow button. A lot of you have done that. That helps our show to continue to grow, and we appreciate that. So that these are considered alms to the algorithmic gods. So thank you for each and every one of those. This part of the show is brought to you by our friends over at Home Title Lock. Homeowners, beware. You could already be a victim of home title theft and not have a clue, because some cyber thief somewhere may have already forged your name onto the title to your home. And here's how you can find out. My partners in Home Title Lock, they've got a special free offer for you today. If you go to HometitleLock.com, register your address there for free, and you'll get a no-obligation free home title scan to make sure that your home's title has not been attempted to be tampered with, is not being tampered with right now, and is in the free and clear. That's a $100 value. They are offering it to you today for free so that you have the peace of mind to know that everything is good to go with the most important investment you have, your own home, because your title is really the only proof that you own it. So make sure that it still claims that. When you go to HometitleLock.com, enter your address and take advantage of this opportunity with the code RADIO. No obligation home title scan, $100 value at HometitleLock.com. I just got this text from a friend of the show. And he sent me, he goes, I don't know if this is going around in the schools, but a buddy of mine who has a kid, or has a friend, let me say this again. A buddy of mine sent this. His friend has a kid in the public schools in the LA Valley. Not sure this is going around the schools, but it's going around the kids. The pamphlet. What to do if a stranger comes up to you on the street. And I'm looking at the actual pamphlet right now. Okay. You open it up. Do not be afraid. If a stranger walks up to you, no need to be scared. Usually they don't mean any harm.
I've seen this.
Do not scream or cry. You have seen this.
But
Do not scream or cry. This can hurt that person's feelings. Do not call him a pedophile. That can be just as offensive as the N-word. Try to get to know him better. He just wants to make new friends, just like you. You said you've seen this before?
I've seen graphics affiliated with this that somebody posted on Twitter, yes.
I'm sorry to be silent. I don't trust myself right now to speak in response to this.
There's really nothing more to say. There's only to do. Millstone update.
And maybe that's a great, yes. There you go. Let's get to Theology Thursday.
Boy, do we need it.
Yes. And this week we kind of take a look at hierarchies of values and priorities, things that matter, what's in your open hand, what's in your closed hand, right? What does it mean to be salt and light? And so since Todd, you were the one that did all the study questions at the end of every chapter in the book. We've been letting you ask the questions as we go through my most recent book, Do What You Believe or You Won't Be Free to Believe It Much Longer. You're up.
Okay, the first 8 chapters, diagnosing a lot of problems. The last chapter, as I told you last week, every time Steve says the church, it's spelled out, both words, in all caps. So we've established exactly what that is. Now there's details, and Steve spends the time talking about the principles and the priorities of what a true church should be. So in light of that, question 1, from the Latin, Que est veritas? Or what is truth? Do people make you feel ashamed when you meet them if their truth is different from yours? And is that why we, as a church, remain so often silent?
I think there are 2 characteristics that are missing in American and really all of Western culture today that are vital to a healthy culture. And these are 2 characteristics that there really truly is only one institution divinely ordained, providentially charged with instilling, modeling, promoting within a culture. And those 2 things are truth and empathy. Truth and empathy. And we live in a culture today where it is truth by desire. What I want to believe to be true is true, whether or not it actually is. How dare you inform me that what I believe is true, it actually is not true. And the one who is informing me of the truth is not seen as the liberator in this day and age. You're seen as the oppressor. If you look at human history, as a species, we have really, truly only ever truly censored 2 things: perversion, truth. Throughout the long arc, 6,000+ years of human history, there's really only 2 things we have truly censored: perversion and truth. And so if you look at social media platforms today, where the vast majority of American communication takes place, right? It's pretty obvious they don't seem to have much of a problem with perversion, right? That's pretty obvious.
Yes.
So then what else? So then that only leaves the other thing that's being censored, right?
The truth.
The truth, yes. And as we just discussed, with YouTube now deciding over a year later, after the CDC admitted the vaccines don't stop the spread of the virus, today, over a year later, they have finally determined that you get to say this now. And it didn't matter what data you presented. I mean, we would have to, when we would put our show on YouTube, we would play the clip of Rochelle Walensky saying, she's the head of CDC. They told us to trust the experts.
Yeah.
Okay. Saying on television that they don't stop the spread of the virus. We would get dinged. We'd have to take those clips out of the show. We'd get dinged on YouTube. And so it's not that YouTube has suddenly decided that this is true. It's that acknowledging this truth fits whatever narrative YouTube is currently trying to craft and promote. Much of what we describe as truth in our culture today is the narrative that affirms our own. Has little or nothing to do with whether or not that is actually true. There is no and this is a void that the church can step in to play referee, to call fouls, truth fouls. That's not true. That is. That's not true. That is.
And in this context, that's not just your pastor doing all the heavy lifting. The point is, you're the church at all times and in all places.
Absolutely. There's as a church on an institutional level also means you. I mean, shouldn't have. I mean, you got to just Catholic just tell you you're part of the priesthood of every believer here. Pay attention to that. You know, the other factor is empathy. And this is what I think a lot of churches actually get wrong with empathy. I think your average successful American evangelical church actually shows phenomenal empathy to unbelievers. Phenomenal empathy to people struggling in sin, making themselves available and open to you. I think the average evangelical American church actually does a phenomenal job with that. The problem is the empathy only runs one way. The average American evangelical church does not do a phenomenal job showing empathy to their own people. They do a great job of showing empathy to the unsaved, the unwashed. They don't do such a great job of showing empathy to the converted. You're often made to feel in your church, if you're the one taking a stand, you're often made to feel, I'm guessing many of you, like you're the weird one. Maybe your own church makes you feel like that. Maybe you go to church on most Sundays and you're just hoping the pastor doesn't actually repudiate what you spent the entire week standing up for. And you'll just, at this point, just take him not mentioning it at all, let alone that you will be affirmed and supported from the pulpit for standing up for those things. And what's ironic about that is the primary mission of the church is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. That is the primary mission of the church. It is not to evangelize the lost. The primary mission of the church is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. What's one of the primary works of the ministry? To evangelize the lost. But you're to be equipped to do that. How are you equipped to do that? That you say yes to people who are suffering, and then you're equipped to say no to people who try to drag you down into what they're immersed in. And so we do a great job right now of equipping you to help people who are suffering. We don't do such a great job of equipping you to say no to the culture that wants to drag you down into the pit with them. We don't do such a great job of that. And so the empathy only goes one way. Show love, show love, show love, show grace, show grace, show grace. The first time, except those are bastardized definitions of those terms. God is love incarnate. And yet the first time he provides a written testimony of his will and revelation to human beings, he gives 2 stone tablets to Moses. And he writes on them a series of do not statements. Don't do this, do not do that, do not do this. The first thing God does in written testimony is show and demonstrate what the boundaries are. These are the things you are to say no to. No. Boundaries you cannot cross. You do not have permission. You are in violation of your covenant with me if you do these things. No is the answer. Let's start with what the boundaries are, what we cannot do. Many of our churches do not do that. I'm sure they would say, well, we don't want to offend the unbeliever. We don't want the unsaved to leave. Have you thought about when was the last time you feared offending the most powerful being in the universe? First, start with love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Then move on to loving your neighbor as you love yourself. Your neighbor is not God. Stop treating him as such. He's just a person that needs repentance to avoid eternal torment in hell every bit as much as you did. And repentance isn't usually spurred on by charitable acts, but by conviction of your own sin. We do not do charitable acts to convict people of their sin, but to show them the forgiveness and mercy of God. But there's another half of that equation. We don't do the other half very well. And so, not coincidentally, Todd, the two things that are missing more from American culture than anything else are those very two things, mercy and empathy.
Number two, if the founders of this country were obviously talking about the primacy of both reason and revelation when they penned, quote, the laws of nature and nature's God, then why have emotional virtue signaling, victimology, and the separation of church and state been such seductive usurpers of the American plumb line?
Well, we have to start with, how do we know what the laws of nature and nature's God are? How do we know what they are? I mean, I remember when Rosie O'Donnell used to go on TV in the 90s and argue for homosexuality on the grounds that we see it in nature. Do you remember these days?
Yes.
Okay. Let's assume that that is true. Don't. That's actually not. But let's assume that it is. We also see in nature the flinging of your own feces, the gorging on lesser prey, and then puking it up to feed your cubs the vomit as food. And we see mass murder of a premeditated variety. It's called hunting in nature. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
There's all forms of things we see in nature that we probably don't want to see emulated as human beings.
Every day is the purge.
Correct. Because they're not made in the image of God. They're not the imago Dei. A lion is not the imago Dei. You know that because you know what a lion is. But neither is your adorable Bichon, like my pet Cap. He's not the imago Dei either. Or furries, your beloved kitty. Not the imago Dei either. That was the conversation we were just having about where the crawdads sing. But in the end, it was morally subversive. The woman's moral compass was to identify with what goes on within soulless nature, which is really just a system, a natural system for the perpetuation of the creation. To our own benefit, by the way. The creation is to be perpetuated to the benefit of us because that's its purpose. It serves us. We don't serve it. We're higher than the creation. We're created in the image of God. You're higher than a tree. You're more valuable than a newt and a salamander. But again, where would these self-evident truths come from? How would we know they're self-evident? Who would introduce them to a culture? And then once introduced, you're like, oh yeah, well, now that I've seen that play itself out, it's so obvious, it's pretty self-evident at that point. When someone turns you onto it and you see it, it becomes pretty self-evident at that point. Who does that? Who introduces that? What I find, and I said this in our small group last night, I want to get your take on this, because it goes into this question as well from the other side. I think a lot of American churches actually benefited from the politicization that they now decry. Because I think a lot of churches got to build pretty massive followings and populations, realizing that they only had to discuss the love and grace and mercy of Christ. And that they just would, let your local pro-family group or your local Republican politician handle the truth and immorality, the messy, divisive stuff. That stuff got to get outsourced, right? Well, now, we're in an age where, frankly, we're sitting here. We don't know if 88-year-old Charles Grassley is going to vote for gay marriage next week or not. Literally, we don't know, okay? And so now you can't trust your Republican politician anymore. And you're not even sure how many of your pro-family groups you can actually trust anymore. And so now you're like, now that I think about it, was I supposed to be getting that stuff from a political party or a parachurch organization anyway? Wasn't I supposed to be getting that stuff from the church, right? And so a bunch of our people are like, I'm going to go back to the source of where this stuff is supposed to be taught and shared and ministered and modeled to a culture to begin with. And now all these pastors with these huge followings in these huge churches, they don't want to fulfill that other half of their obligation because they won't be as huge anymore if they do. Or at least that's their fear. They can't contemplate that God may prune a tree that God may say, yeah, you're probably going to lose. Like the church in Chattanooga I was at earlier this month, I think they told me they had, in the last 2 years, they've lost something like 1,000 people, but then had like 1,000 new people come, and people like driving from hours away because they're like, hey, we're getting fed here. Let's go. That's worth the drive. You know, the idea your God is too small, that people in your community just couldn't possibly be saved if God didn't have your unique and genuine, clever, winsome way to win people over. Couldn't possibly happen any other way. He couldn't possibly prune a tree, get rid of the dead weight that's really not serious about this in your congregation anyway, and bring you people that really are serious about it. And since they're serious, they might actually tithe more because they're serious about it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think such a thing happening would be far more obvious if it's happening within evangelical circles, because you tend to be more holistically conservative.
Mm-hmm.
The problem in the Catholic world is when you've diagnosed in multiple political elections before is the roughly 50-50 split that has caused that and the Catholic vote, or a lot of elections have hinged on which way that swings. So you have a Gollum-esque problem within the Catholic Church pew sitters right now, and you have two very different people. Amongst those who are more politically conservative, they may be going through that, but I don't know that holistically the Catholic does what I'm saying make sense? Okay.
Yeah, because that the overall social teaching there has embraced or allowed a level of comfort to to wayward ideologies when we get outside of issues like abortion and gay marriage.
Yeah, they went
right?
Those people go become universalists or something if they're Protestant loosely. They're not going to be sitting in your church, but they are sitting in a lot of Catholic churches. Number 3, how often during a typical day do you contemplate the work of either God or the devil in your life? Is your prayer life offensive or defensive in nature?
I think that, and I know this is going to sound counterintuitive because of how much I'm using the term demonic in my everyday analysis these days, but I actually do think that we underestimate our God. And it's subtle, but it's distinctive when we say things like, all we have left to do is pray. Contemplate what you just said. Again, let me rephrase that. Contemplate what we've all just said, because we've all said this, all right, in some context. Every option's exhausted. I've tried them all. I guess the only thing to do here is to appeal to the most powerful being in all of the universe. See what he's got up his sleeve. Right? When you lay it out like that, how dumb does that sound?
As dumb as anything you could possibly say.
And yet, have we all not essentially said that thing?
Well,
yes.
more than that, all of our life on any given day has basically born. It's enfleshed that.
Correct.
It has made that incarnate.
I go to remember last Friday on Feedback Friday, the email we got from the guy who says, I'm so despondent.
Yeah.
Every opportunity that we've had to make a dent in the culture is gone. I feel like all we have left to do is to pray and live faithfully. Do you remember my answer to that? I'm like,
of course.
Brother, that's actually been the plan all along.
Yeah.
I mean, how'd we do this thing called truth before there was a Republican Party to bitch and complain about? The church began in 1791 when the U.S. Constitution was ratified. Now it's got about almost 1,800 years under its belt prior to that moment. What did it do all these times? How did we survive? And I think that gets back to the whole empathy question, though. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Do you mind? Successful, wealthy guy at a major corporation goes to his evangelical pastor and says, I'm not sure I'm being generous enough. I'm very well off. I'm feeling really convicted. can you, help me to live a more generous life, to more model the generosity that God has given me and passing that generosity on to others? Any pastor's going to say, yeah, introduce them to a couple of good causes, maybe something that they're thinking about doing for an outreach program at the church, point them to some verses about generosity, consider the lilies in the field, right? Right. That would go on, right? Okay. That exact same individual goes to his pastor and says,
the exact same pastor,
and the exact same individual later on goes to that same pastor and says, hey, this corporation here, they're starting to do ESG, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They, are telling me, I'm a high-ranking VP of this corporation. They're telling me that I have to impose this trans stuff on my entire division, that I got to go through it. I have to affirm it. I have to sign my name to affirm their diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. What do I do? This goes back to what I just said a few minutes ago. We do a great job of teaching our people how to say yes. How many pastors have told our people when to and then equipped them for saying no? No gets said sometime, otherwise hell would be empty. We all agree something's down there, right?
Yeah.
We all agree somebody's down there, right? So at some point, no needs to be said. Now, the heart of God tilts towards forgiveness. Mercy triumphs over judgment, but does it cancel judgment?
No.
Mercy triumphed over judgment at the cross, right? It was accomplished. The wrath of God had been satisfied.
Yes.
The law had been fulfilled, right?
Yes.
Was the law canceled?
No.
Was it fulfilled?
Yes.
Are those two totally different things?
Yes.
Hell yeah, they are. Hell emphasis, yeah, they are. For emphasis that the law has not been canceled, I present to you Exhibit 1. Hell is full. It has been fulfilled. Mercy triumphs over judgment, but it has not been canceled.
Along those lines, I think the next two questions I'll combine because they dovetail perfectly with what you're saying, and I'll let you finish.
Okay.
How are compassion and tolerance different? Which do or should Christians tend to practice more? How are justice and utopia different? Which do or should Christians tend to aspire to more?
Christians should oppose tolerance as it's defined in this day and age, because it is defined as affirmation and endorsement. And utopia, Christians should recognize from Babel onward, every attempt to create that east of Eden has had disastrous to genocidal, democidal consequences. And utopia never is some kind of post-millennial, Rushdoony inspired Christian republic. Those who advocate utopia don't even know who an R.J. Rushdoony was. Their definition of those things is a lot different than yours, I promise you. So as a default mechanism, those should be instant buzzwords in the culture in which you live that should set your spidey sense off as a believer right away. And just to hammer again the point that empathy only goes one way. How many times have you heard me say every time you turn into Tolerance Boulevard, it's a what?
One-way street.
It's a one-way street. You have to tolerate their blasphemies. They don't have to tolerate your glorifications. That's not a social compact. That's tyranny. That's not tolerance. It's oppression. And it's on purpose.
It somehow you keep stupidly accepting it and feeling good about it.
And I think a lot of what has happened to the suburban American church, and I bring that up because that's where most evangelical churches are centered, or in the suburbs, is a lot of them were established in eras like the late 80s, early to mid 90s, where you moved to the suburbs to escape the frontal assault going on in the urban areas of the culture war, right? And so there was this idea that you lived in this refuge where these things weren't going to come to your front door.
You got comfortable.
You got comfortable. And now they're here. They're real. and they are spectacular. And then you just drove down your suburban street one day and saw a trans flag. And you're like, what? And it was like the neighbor you've like lived on that street with for like 20 years. And you're like, what? We just had a Memorial Day picnic. Why do they have a trans flag in their yard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be more. Because just because the light isn't interested in advertising and advancing its values doesn't mean the dark's going to be like, yeah, we'll sit this one out too. No, nature abhors a vacuum and it will fill that void. And that is what is going on right now. And I just think a lot of you, within the sound of my voice, have not been adequately prepared by your church for what is coming and what's already here. And that's because the church showed more empathy to the people who didn't follow Jesus than it showed to the ones who did and do. It only goes one way. Tolerance only goes one way outside the church. Empathy only tends to go one way within the church. The people that are on the front lines pushing back against this evil and stopping these entities from shutting those exact same churches down are often treated as pariahs within their church. Curiosities. But that's okay. Do you know who else was treated as a pariah and as a curiosity? John the Baptist, for doing things like confronting Herod in the street. And Jesus said about him, no man born of women has ever been more blessed. So you are in good company. Sweaty teenagers, your poker buddies, your pets, maybe it's something else, maybe a little more personal. Whatever you've got going on in your home from a smell standpoint, if you think there is nothing you can do about it, put our friends over at EdenPureDeals.com/Steve with the discount code Steve3. Put them to the test with their proven Oxy technology from their Thunderstorm air purifier. It quickly destroys a lot of the bad stuff, anything from viruses to odors to molds, so much more in your air. They are filterless. I don't know how that works. I did ask, they explained it, and then I couldn't understand their explanation. But I can tell you from my own experience in my own home that it works. I've seen from other people that have emailed me, if they've tried the product as well, it works in their home too. Odors from litter boxes, trash cans, smoke, dirty diapers, and more. No match for the powerful Thunderstorm sent out from the O3 molecules within the Eden Thunderstorm air purifier. It's an outstanding product. It's just a mouthful to say, okay? So just go to EdenPureDeals.com, give it a shot, get $200 off right now. That's, well, man, $200 off. How expensive is it, Steve? Well, the units come in 3 packs. That's why Steve3 is the promo code for the discount, because they come in packs of 3. So you'll get it for under $200 and $200 off. A pack of 3 and free shipping to give it a shot today at EdenPureDeals.com, discount code Steve3 at EdenPureDeals.com, discount code Steve3. Let's get to 3 non-political questions.
We all have questions.
Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Who am I? A search and a question of identity. Why am I here? A question of meaning and purpose. Where am I going? Question of destiny.
Some better than others.
What sort of morality or proto-morality would you expect to find in a chimpanzee troop?
Injecting some levity into the demise of Western civilization. It's 3 questions on the Steve Deace Show.
Yes, 3, hopefully somewhat, maybe decent questions. Because we need a break from the demise and fall of Western civilization. First up, what is the most overrated sports event on the sports calendar? What's the most underrated?
I would say the Olympics are the most overrated.
I would have really disagreed with you about 5, 6, 7 years ago, but now I don't really care. Yeah.
It's kind of, I don't have a lot of
Team USA
zeal any longer. And it's kind of hard to, we don't really have a natural rivalry like we had with the Soviet Union when I was growing up, and the Olympics were must-see TV back in those days.
Plus, like, 3 out of the last 4 Olympics have been halfway across the planet, and so you can't watch most things live.
Right.
The last few times.
Correct. That's a big part of it too. You're right. But I just, frankly, well, Steve, we got China. Well, I mean, a lot of the athletes that we put up there in high-profile positions, particularly on the soccer team, they want us to be China. So it's kind of hard to, when you're people running your Olympic teams or the athletes themselves love China, kind of hard to fashion China into your rival. So to me, the Olympics just have almost no juice left with me. I find them, I would make that the most overrated event. And for underrated, I'm going to say Game 7, man, of a Stanley Cup playoff series, especially if it goes into overtime. Just because hockey is the clear 4th major league sport right now in the country, and it's a distant 4th. So I just think that that's a spectacle that a lot of people are missing out on. So that would be my most underrated.
My most underrated is your most overrated. You're missing the forest for the trees. There's no doubt that obviously, and especially our generation, with the USSR and the 1980 Miracle on Ice and everything like that. But even without that, I mean, it's a bias, and it's not one it's okay if your preference is nothing but traditional team sports. But the amount of dedication, aptitude, regardless of whether we have a narrative or not in the Olympics, it's amazing, and it's amazing as it's ever been. We've had some of the most amazing athletic accomplishments in the history of not only American but world sports in terms of records being broken, Usain Bolt, things like that. It's as good as it's ever been in some ways. And Michael Phelps, again, I know you appreciate.
Sure.
Steve, you've read. So, but if those sports also mean a lot more in my own personal life, my kids. So there's a reason why Steve says what he says and what I say but I do think they are underrated. Overrated, I think, for very interesting reasons. And just bear with me, because I have plenty of trolls for football, college football, and rightly so. But this one, it's the current college football national championship. And it's because it worked too well, that whatever we call it right now, everybody hated some really good team was always being left out when it was just 2. Now that we got to 4, we really have far, far, far less controversy. But it's actually made the actual national championship game, as often as not, underwhelming. There's been some good ones and some doozies, but now it's why we got what we wanted, and we're already sick of it, and we need the 16. So I think that's been fascinating, how coming to grips with how something that worked, people got what they wanted, it kind of boomeranged back on them.
I think for me, most overrated is what's going on right now is the Little League World Series. I probably am just a curmudgeon. I just think it's a bunch of helicopter parents who think Timmy and Joey are just God's gift to baseball, and you're never going to see them ever again play. This is the pinnacle of their career.
Holy cow.
This is the pinnacle of their career. What?
Wow. The old man shakes fists at cloud at a new level. I mean, wow. McIntyre, you magnificent SOB.
I know
wow.
That's really, really curmudgeonly. I just can't get into it.
Don't come to me with your...
the only thing it makes me happy about is that I know that like next week football season begins every time. Every Little League World Series.
That might be the meanest thing ever said on this show in its history, and that is saying something. Yes.
Phenomenal.
I think the most
phenomenal, Jim.
Underrated. Now,
Tremendous. Tremendous take.
I'm gonna piss off a heck of a lot more people. It's the final.
Him.
It's the final match day of the Premier League. Every single team plays at the same time, and there's always pandemonium. It seems like where, at least at the bottom of the standings, teams trying to avoid relegation. This last year, It wasn't until like, I don't know, the 65th minute or so when we kind of figured out who was going to be the eventual champion of the Premier League. So it's actually really underrated, mostly because we're,
you 12-year-old little leaguers, get the hell out of here with your nonsense. But Premier League soccer, I expect better of you. Can we raise the game a little bit?
That's
phenomenal.
That's the most treasonous segment in the history of this show.
None dare call it.
It is. That was just pure unadult. It wasn't anger. It was treasonous.
America is truly dead.
It was treasonous. Yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Little League. I didn't even make that connection before. Little League to Premier League. Yikes. My bad. I still believe it, though.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Number 2. What's your prediction? Give me a good solid prediction, a detailed prediction about your college football team, what they're going to do this year.
I think Michigan will be better than it was last year. This is the team that
back on the train, baby.
No, I don't. I hate
back on the train
because I don't operate that way. They were actually building to this team. Last year's team was the shock. They did not think that was going to happen. They were trying to. That's why all the coaches in Harbaugh's contract year were all giving 2-year deals. This was the team that was expected with the way they had been recruiting that they would end up competing, if not vanquishing Ohio State. I think Michigan will be better than it was last year. And I think if you watch the BTN bus tour on the Big Ten Network, they're still talking and tweeting about what they saw at Michigan. They were completely blown away. They expected that Aiden Hutchinson, who I love and adore, by the way, but that he was essentially the entire program. Last year was about trying to rebuild the culture and win as many games as you could so that they could get a second year to get to this year. And it just turned out that they caught lightning in a bottle and it went much better than they thought. But this will actually be Harbaugh's best team this year. Especially, and then if you look at the schedule they're playing against, I mean, they're just going to physically roll pretty much every team on their schedule except for a couple of games. And then you have Ohio State at the end of the year. And I think both those teams, I think it'll be like 2006. I think both of those teams, or 2016, they'll both be in the top 5, and I wouldn't be shocked if they were both undefeated going into that game.
The Badgers right now are kind of like my Packers Aaron Rodgers principle, but the Packers are always going to be a solid playoff team with a chance at making a run at the Super Bowl, but like it's every year. So that's a lot of fun, but it hasn't panned out. We have a quarterback who hasn't panned out really at all with Wisconsin, who is supposed to be the best recruit we've ever had from the outset. You're not counting Russell Wilson, who you rented for a year. I mean, and he's in the bottom tier of Big Ten quarterbacks. So I just expect what I have expected the last few years with him. The Badgers are fundamentally sound, very much along the Iowa principle. They're going to be better than most teams, but you need him to play much better to beat the top dogs and make a deeper run. But I have 2 teams now. Arkansas Razorbacks going to be really, really exciting team. They've got a really interesting quarterback. He's kind of a throwback, really good runner. And that whole athletic program is just kind of reinvigorated. So Woo Pig Sui, I'm excited. They had a fantastic year last year, and they have enough back that, like Steve said about what he believes with Michigan, Arkansas should actually be better.
I think for Iowa, there's a chance they could be significantly better and have a significantly worse record at the same time, like a 7-win record. But I would.
You have the same problem I do. Your quarterback, right?
Yeah, quarterback, and really, actually, it's a different. I think it's the entire offensive scheme.
Oh well, then
there's that. Yeah, there's that too. So I do think there are a couple of.
Yes, again, McIntyre.
Yeah, no, I just. There is that.
Someone just emailed me, whatever Aaron's taking before the show, I want some of that.
It's called sleeping in for once, which apparently makes me more curmudgeonly. I don't know. I think if they can actually, I think it's going to be hard for them to be worse than they were offensively last year because they were nearly at the bottom of the pack. I mean, they were down there. I think it's hard to do worse than that. I also think they have some athletes. Again, they have for the last couple of years. They just don't utilize them. So, if they can actually protect the quarterback, there's a chance the passing game could be better. I also think the backs that they have too kind of run more north and south. So I think those two factors, they could be a little bit better offensively. I think the defense could be significantly better even than last year's defense, which was great. They have players now on the defensive line, and they have good depth on the defensive line as well to give a pass rush that they really didn't have for much of last year. So I think they could be significantly better and have a significantly worse record because of who's actually on their record, and maybe an ascendant Nebraska. I don't know. So that's kind of my prediction. I would say I'm going to be really bold here. 8-4, something like that, because that's kind of what they finish every year.
All right, before you do the final question, a reminder that in these unprecedented times, you need to make sure before you get into this real estate market and the Let's Go Brandon economy that you don't have a Let's Go Brandon real estate agent, all right? You need one that you can trust, and you would find one of those at realestateagentsitrust.com. We made it as easy for you as possible. A lot of times these agents come from right here in this audience, so they have the same values that you do. They got your back. We've got thousands of agents waiting in line to get listed in this database because we don't just take anybody. Yeah, your track record of success has to be long, validated, and verified, all right, because we're putting the credibility of the Blaze here behind that recommendation. So to get you started today, go to realestateagentsitrust.com, provide some basic info, and then our team will reach out and contact you to make an introduction to a preferred agent in your town or the town you're trying to get to when you go to realestateagentsitrust.com.
Final question on a different note. What's the difference between judging and condemning, or judgment and condemnation?
Do we mean this in a criminal context, in a spiritual one?
In a spiritual, theological.
Well, in a condemnation, when the Bible says there is no longer no condemnation for those who are in Christ, it is talking in terms of eternal. It doesn't say you're without any consequences, but that you will not be eternally condemned because you're covered by the atonement of Christ. Think of it in terms of a real estate property. When a real estate property is condemned, it's beyond reparable. That right? It's usually taken away from that landlord. It's maybe going to be demolished, destroyed. All right, but there are. Before we get to a condemnation, there could be lots of things a landlord could do with that property that would lead him to getting consequences for his actions, right? Okay, so that's where I would make those two distinctions between consequences and condemnation from a theological or a biblical construct. And from a judgment standpoint, by what standard are we judging? That is the issue. And are we evenly applying those standards of judgment, right? That are we applying them to ourselves? Or are we just applying them to others? I think that's one of the most devastating aspects of the book of Romans, which I think is the greatest theological treatise ever written, is that Paul demolishes arguments against the gospel that are still hundreds, if not 1,000 or 2,000 years away. But in between that, as you're kind of rooting him on for the home team, he'll every now and then turn the tables on you and say, hey, look at yourself here, and we're going to do that now in this next section of writing. And so I think that segment, they're judgmental and judgment are not the same thing in a biblical worldview. Judgmentalism is often associated with one-sidedness, hypocrisy, a failure to have any self-awareness. Judgment is prudent, provided it is evenly and adequately and properly ascribed.
Judgment is more process-driven. Condemnation has a greater finality to it. But beyond that, all I know in both cases, the Little Leaguers of America felt both of them from Aaron McIntyre today. And I can't decide if that's going to be my best or worst of the week.
Very well played. I think, Steve, you did a good job of explaining condemnation in kind of the vertical, eternal sense. I think in the horizontal, how we deal with people, judgment is an observation. Condemnation is, as Todd said, kind of a finality. Like, thank God I'm not like them. They're beyond repair. I think that's how I define it, at least in the horizontal sense.
All right, the show's done. We're sticking around to do overtime for Blaze TV subscribers. For the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow, noon to 2 Eastern, after Glenn Beck here on Blaze TV, John 3:17.